Today we're looking at just over 10 games running on the Mac Pro 5.1. We'll see what the highest settings possible to run each game are, and of course keep the FPS counter running the entire time so you get to see just how each game is performing. First, a brief look at my specs. I have a 2010 5.1 with a single Xeon x5690. This CPU has 6 cores and clocks in at a maximum of 3.73 GHz, the fastest of any 5.1 CPU. I have 48GB of 1333 MHz DDR3 memory, which is arranged in a triple channel layout with 3 16GB sticks. Most importantly for gaming, my GPU is an AMD Radeon RX 6600 XT. I have a version with a modded BIOS, so it runs in my Mac with a boot screen. In many ways, it's the ideal GPU for this machine, not least because of its insane power to performance ratio. I'll talk more about this 6600 XT at the end of the video. My monitor is a 1440p Dell U2719D. These things are easily under $100 used. I got mine for 50 UK pounds and I've overclocked it to 80Hz, which is super easy and makes games look a lot nicer. Alright, into the games testing. First off, a game that's been part of PC benchmarks for almost 10 years now. Grand Theft Auto 5. We're looking at max settings with multiple sample anti-aliasing, or MSAA, at 2 times. There's not much to report here other than the game running at the full 80 FPS almost all the time. GTA 5 came out for PC in 2015, so it's to be expected, I suppose. It's still great to see though. The times I saw slowdowns were when explosions were happening on screen involving lots of vehicles. Overall it's a 10 out of 10 experience here. Driving cars through all sorts of areas went fine too. I can assure you even the GT120 that came with your Mac Pro back in 2010 would stand a decent chance at running GTA 5. It's one of these strangely well optimized games that performs well on low-end hardware. I wouldn't be surprised if that were to do with it being released on 3 generations of console hardware, going all the way back to the PS3 and the Xbox 360. Next, Overwatch 2. Overwatch isn't the most demanding of titles graphically. I played at high settings because I experienced occasional frame drops when I turned it up higher. For shooter/esports titles like this one, it's really not worth cranking up graphics settings if your frame rate is going to be below your monitor's max. I'll be honest, I'm not a big fan of Overwatch, but some of the characters are fun to play with, especially if you're playing with friends. As you can see, my frame rate stuck right to 80 the whole time I was playing. Close encounters and fights didn't stress out my system too much. Right, that's enough Overwatch for me for the next year or so. Cyberpunk 2077 is an interesting experience on PC. It's definitely in the top 10, perhaps top 5 games for graphics quality, even 4 years after release. Truly stunning with the right system then, how does my 5.1 setup handle it? I had the settings at an overall high and ran the beautiful benchmark that comes installed with the game. The GPU is what struggles in games like these with crazy complex open worlds. My 6600 XT managed just under 62 frames a second on average during the benchmark. You've got to balance quality with frame rate here. I'd love to see a solid 80 FPS, but hate to turn the settings down. I think the high preset was perfect here. Man, this is probably my favourite looking game out there at the moment, or a close tie between this, Metro Exodus, and Red Dead Redemption 2, the latter of which you're watching me test now. I played with the overall quality slider set right about in the middle. For some reason the FPS counter wouldn't show its face with Red Dead open. I looked at AMD's software afterwards though, as that counts it too. At 1440p I managed an average of 65 FPS. This is another one of those games that relies heavily on the ability of your graphics card. I think the 6800 would be a better fit here, as I wasn't bottlenecking the CPU. I've not heard of anyone running the 6700 XT in the Mac Pro 5.1 yet, so unfortunately can't recommend that GPU until we know for sure. Red Dead 2 was a perfectly playable experience here anyway. Lots of beautiful scenery at a reasonable frame rate. You get the idea. Mortal Kombat 11 is a game I can't recommend trying enough if you're the owner of a 1440p or above screen of a decent size. Morbid as it can be to watch the characters get into some unfortunately gruesome encounters with one another, it does look very well polished, and the game runs great on my system. I had all the settings at very high, minus the anti-aliasing, which I turned down just a little bit to keep my frame rate locked in. I'm not sure why, but Mortal Kombat seemed not to want to run at 80 FPS. It maxed out at 60 nearly the entire length of my game though, so honestly not the biggest deal. Minecraft. This is Bedrock Edition for PC, by the way. Yeah, it ran absolutely fine. I had all the fancy graphics options turned on, but found I had a slightly smoother experience once I turned the render distance down to just below 30. Minecraft is an almost entirely CPU-bound game, as you can see from the chart on the left. Even with anti-aliasing set to the maximum option, I didn't really see my 6600 XT sweating. Between 60 and 80 FPS was average here. It varied greatly depending on whether I was in the air and looking at faraway things. Also, if you want a higher frame rate, just turn the render distance down slightly. Always the way with Minecraft. CSGO 2 is a game I can't pretend to have ever played before in my life. I'm not an avid gamer and have just somehow stayed away from this one, I guess. I found it didn't run very well on the 5,1. My CPU was not at fault here as far as I can tell. The GPU was just having a really tough time with the newer textures of the recently updated game. I even double-checked my drivers to see if some optimizations had been made, but I was on the January release of Adrenaline software already. I played at medium settings with anti-aliasing options on the second lowest available. My frame rates dropped as low as the 20s, which I was really surprised about. I'm not big on CS knowledge, so if you think I've been running it wrong, please do point out errors in the comments. Overall, not the best experience, to be honest. More bad news, I'm afraid. Right now you'd be looking at Call of Duty Warzone gameplay if the Mac Pro 5,1 could run it at all. The Xeon processors on the Mac Pro 5,1 do not support AVX2 instructions. AVX2 support is a requirement within Warzone. It's also necessary in order to run Starfield, the 2023 game a lot of people really hyped up. Thankfully Starfield was a bit of a flop, but yeah, Warzone is not going to even open on your 5,1. AVX2 is one of those things your PC either will or will not support. There's just no getting around it as far as I'm aware. Project Cars 2. I ran the game at the overall high setting. This went absolutely fine. This game isn't a massive struggle to run. Remember, Project Cars 3 is out at the moment already. I just thought I'd show you a racing game with some fairly complex visuals so you can see how the 5,1 gets on. My FPS was a solid and sturdy 80 for most of the race, but when you're close to lots of opponents or going particularly fast, there's a little bit of slowdown. Nothing below 70 FPS from what I saw. Racing games, I think, are far better enjoyed on a setup with multiple screens or one ultra-wide. If you're using one of those options, definitely consider going up to the RX 6800 GPU. You won't need to do any power supply modding, as the 6000 series are super low power considering their graphical abilities. Fortnite, as we've seen before in this channel, ran pretty much fine on the 5,1. I do find it surprising how difficult it can be to run the game at higher settings these days, as the game is obviously not well known for its impeccable realism. I ran the game in performance mode actually, because it's a lot smoother that way. I had render distance at epic, but some other settings turned down just a little bit. There were stutters here and there, but 60 FPS and above was absolutely fine at 1440p. The Witcher 3 was a blast from the past, but seriously quite challenging to run. I don't think this game came particularly well optimised for my 6000 series GPU, since it released half a decade before the 6600 XT hit the shelves. I ran an overall high preset, which is one below the max, and saw frame rates between 60 and 70 on average. It did jump up to 80 occasionally, but again, a bit of a poor performer on this machine. Some older games have this effect due to their lack of optimization, like I mentioned, but GTA 5, which was developed in very similar, if not the same years, ran very well. So it might purely come down to how the game engines on some titles have aged. Alright, I'm getting a little bit too PC nerdy at this point. This whole video has felt like something a Windows PC building channel would make really, but I hope it's been useful to watch. Thanks for watching, as always. Leave a like if you enjoyed, and of course subscribe so you don't miss more old Mac content. My Patreon is in the description and costs $3.99 if you do fancy contributing financially to the channel. I'll see you all next week.